Hey guys, tonight we float back in time, drifting across the silvered surface of a long-lost lake under a velvet sky. There's a soft patter of rain overhead, barely touching your skin before vanishing into cool mist. Beneath you, the inky waters of Lake Texcoco ripple gently, cradling something strange, something alive. You squint across the water, and there, like islands summoned from a dream, are patches of green floating silently in the dark. The air smells of wet earth and crushed maize, and if you listen closely, you can almost hear the splash of a paddle, the rustle of cornstalks, the slow breath of a city being born on water. You're not standing on firm ground. In fact, you're not sure this counts as land at all. But here, right here, is where one of the greatest cities in history will rise, balanced precariously on the watery bones of a volcanic valley. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this if you show up without a canoe or at least some floaties. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing at the edge of the Valley of Mexico, sometime around the 14th century. The clouds are bloated with rain, and the high-altitude air presses cool and heavy against your skin. Around you stretches a basin ringed by mountains, their dark shoulders hunched like old gods watching you make your first misstep into the mud. This is not what you'd call ideal real estate. The floor of the valley is clogged with brackish lakes, salty in the north, fresh in the south, and prone to flooding, with little dry land in between. But the Mexica people, later known as the Aztecs, didn't really get to pick and choose. By the time they wandered into this valley, most of the good spots had already been claimed by rival city-states. So, they did what any desperate, determined people might do when all they have is bad options: they adapted. Legend says they were guided by prophecy. That they saw an eagle perched on a cactus, devouring a snake, and knew this swampy lakebed was the place. You imagine the reaction. Seriously? This flooded mess? But somehow, through divine signs or sheer stubbornness, they chose to settle smack in the middle of Lake Texcoco. If it seems like a city shouldn't float, you're not wrong. The ground beneath your feet feels suspiciously like it's breathing, soft and unsure. The Mexicas start by building small artificial islands, using mud and reeds, then piling up dirt hauled from the lake bottom. It's a bit like trying to build a mansion on a waterbed. But give it time, these folks are about to engineer one of the most mind-boggling systems of agriculture in history. You wander through their early encampment. Tents fashioned from bark and woven mats shudder under wind and rain. Children dart barefoot through puddles, and elders cluster around fire pits, muttering prayers to gods of rain, maize, and war. They are survivors, yes, but also experimenters. You spot one woman scooping lake mud into a basket, humming a tune that's older than language. They quickly realize they'll need more than just platforms to survive here. The lake doesn't exactly offer room for crop fields or cattle herds. So, they study the lake itself. Watch the birds that nest in the reeds. Notice how certain plants float, and how fish gather near shallow mud banks. Out of this watery world, they start to imagine something new: Chinampas. Before we dig, gently, into what those are, take a moment to admire the calm. The rain has eased to a drizzle. The sky glows with fireflies, and distant torchlight flickers on the water like molten amber. You hear a flute somewhere, rising from a canoe. It's not a song you know, but it sticks to your ribs like warm cornmeal. Back to those Chinampas. You step into a canoe carved from a hollow tree trunk, guided by a farmer whose arms are lean from years of rowing and mud hauling. He points out long, rectangular plots rising from the lake, dense with plants, bordered by willow trees. These are not rafts. They're more like floating gardens, tethered to the lake bottom by a matrix of roots and stakes. Ingeniously, they don't truly float, they're built up from the shallow lakebed, with layers of mud, compost, and reeds. Mainstream historians agree the Chinampas allowed the Aztecs to farm 5 to 7 times more efficiently than traditional land farming. But historians still argue whether these were wholly an Aztec invention, or if earlier groups like the Xochimilca pioneered the system. Either way, the Aztecs would master it, and turn it into the food engine of their empire. As you drift along the channels between these garden plots, you begin to feel the rhythm of the place. The steady dip of the paddle. The chorus of frogs. The splash of something, not big enough to be threatening, but still unsettling, off to your left. Maybe a turtle. Hopefully. And here's your first quirky tidbit of the night. Aztec farmers used human waste from communal latrines as fertilizer. It wasn't just practical, it was prized. Collecting night soil, as they politely called it, was a respected job. Yes, someone out there proudly described their profession as poop hauler. Bet you feel better about your own day job now. As night deepens, the mist thickens. You hunker down in the canoe, blanket pulled tight, listening to your guide as he murmurs stories of gods who live beneath the lake. One, Tlaloc, wears a crown of frogs and breathes clouds. Another, Calciotlacue, dances in the rainfall. You ask if they're real, and he just chuckles. They're as real as you are, floating through dreams. The rain begins to fade completely now, and you close your eyes. Somewhere out there in the dark, an eagle might still be perched on a cactus, waiting for a new empire to rise. You wake slowly, if it counts as waking when you never quite fell asleep, to the sound of water lapping gently against hollow wood. The canoe rocks beneath you like a cradle, and for a second, you forget where you are. Then you remember, you're still in Lake Texcoco, drifting toward a city that shouldn't exist. The horizon is glowing now. Not from sunlight, not yet, but from fires. Cooking fires, ceremonial flames, torches bobbing along causeways. The city ahead is Tenochtitlán, the heart of the Aztec Empire, built in the middle of this watery expanse. You blink, take it in, and whisper something between, wow, and, what were they thinking? Seriously, who builds a city in the center of a salty, flood-prone lake? Well, when all the good land is taken and your gods send you very specific visions, you get creative. Plus, the Aztecs had something to prove. They weren't the original rulers here, they were latecomers, scrappy newcomers seen as wild by more established city-states. But give them a swamp and some time, and they'll hand you back a metropolis. You paddle closer. Tenochtitlan doesn't just sit in the lake, it rises from it. It's engineered into the lake, stitched to it, balanced on Chinampas, causeways, and ritual confidence. The city is arranged like a massive grid, with canals in place of streets and little footbridges arching gracefully over the water. You pass other canoes loaded with woven baskets, tamales wrapped in corn husks, and flowers so vivid they don't seem real. The morning light creeps across the water like syrup. You glide past the great stone wall, and watch as a group of workers unload dirt from baskets slung across their backs. They're still building, always building, extending the city by scooping up lakebed muck and piling it into neat rectangles, each one framed by wooden stakes and woven reed mats. It's Chinampa expansion in real time. Quietly glorious. And wildly muddy. This building method was far more than a desperate swamp hack. It was an innovation. The Aztecs dug canals to drain some areas while using the displaced mud to build islands. They diverted springs for fresh water, constructed dikes to hold back the salty parts of the lake, and essentially terraformed a region that nature never meant to host a mega-capital. Modern engineers still puzzle over how they did it. Sure, we've got computers and cranes, but they had obsidian blades, wooden tools, and sheer willpower. They managed to stabilize a city on a lakebed so unstable that parts of modern-day Mexico City, built over the ruins of Tenochtitlan, still sink a few inches every year. Yep. You're walking over floating history that's still slowly collapsing beneath office buildings and taco stands. Your guide, let's call him Cuautli, because everyone needs a friend with a cool Nahuatl name, shows you the cleverest trick of all. See that causeway? It connects Tenochtitlan to the mainland in 3 long stretches. Each has removable bridges. That means the city could isolate itself instantly if enemies attacked. Pretty slick for a society that didn't even use the wheel. You float under a low bridge and come face to face with a sleeping dog. It's a Xoloitzcuintli, a hairless breed, sacred to the Aztecs, and probably judging your outfit. The dog yawns, stretches, and goes back to ignoring you. Same little guy. Same. But beneath all this impressive architecture and ingenuity was something more basic: survival. These people didn't just want a city, they needed to feed it. That's where Chinampas come in again. They weren't just agricultural miracles, they were real estate. If you wanted more room, you made some. That's not poetic metaphor, that's literally how Tenochtitlán grew. One fringe theory suggests the entire city was built atop a vast network of buried Chinampas, stabilized by rock fill and vegetation. Like a floating sponge of earth that somehow doesn't drown. Most scholars scoff at that idea, but hey, historians still argue whether the central precinct was constructed in one go, or evolved through generations of messy improvisation. Your canoe slides past the family harvesting amaranth, their laughter rising like birdsong. The colors here are almost obnoxious: deep greens of the Chinampas, bright reds and oranges of marigolds, cobalt glaze on pottery. You try not to stare at the guy with feathers in his hair and a live iguana on his shoulder. It's a vibe. Let's pause for a moment to appreciate how weirdly effective this all is. Chinampas didn't just work, they produced surplus food in a region many would have written off as unfarmable. A single acre could yield up to 7 harvests per year. You heard that right. 7. In modern farming, 2 or 3 is the norm. These floating plots? They were basically hydroponic gardens made with lake goo and optimism. And here comes a fun fact. When the Spanish first arrived, they assumed the Chinampas were natural islands. That's how seamlessly they blended into the ecosystem. And that assumption probably saved them some embarrassment. Because trying to explain to your king that your empire is getting outfarmed by mud boats would be a tough scroll to send. The city is fully awake now. You hear conch shells blowing in the distance, signaling the day's start. Smoke rises from temple courtyards, and the smell of roasting maize and chili hits you like a warm hug and a threat. You pass beneath an archway and into the edge of the city proper. No more floating gardens for now, just dense stone buildings, marketplaces, and the quiet roar of daily life beginning. But the Chinampas are never far away. They are the city's lungs, quietly breathing sustenance into every household. Without them, none of this exists. And to think, it all began with someone brave, or bored, enough to reach into lake mud and think, "Hey, I bet I could grow something in this." You lean back in the canoe and sigh, the cool air brushing your face like silk. The sun finally breaks above the mountains, sending a wash of light across the city's white walls and green gardens. And for a moment, it feels like the whole world is floating. Your hands are in the mud now. Not metaphorically. Not philosophically. You're literally elbow-deep in a bucket of lakebed sludge, and it squishes through your fingers with the lazy defiance of pudding that's been left out too long. Welcome to the not-so-glamorous, oddly meditative heart of the Aztec agricultural miracle, the sacred, mucky art of Chinampa making. Quatley gives you a nod of approval. "Good mud," he says, squinting as if evaluating a fine wine. "Sinks slow. Holds tight. Smells like turtles." You take his word for it. There's a funk to it, sure, but also a kind of richness, like the earth itself is trying to feed you. Around you, other workers are scooping up more lake muck, mixing it with rotting plant material, charcoal, and fish scraps. Not exactly the kind of compost you'd use in a trendy backyard planter, but here? It's liquid gold. Or maybe sludge gold. You get the idea? To make a Chinampa, you start by staking out a rectangular frame in the shallow parts of the lake, often around 30 by 2.5 meters. Then you weave walls out of reeds and wattle, and slowly begin to fill the frame with alternating layers of mud and organic debris. It's like making a giant lasagna of filth. A long, patient, weirdly calming lasagna. As you build, the weight of the material causes the Chinampa to settle just at water level. The surrounding water seeps up through the soil, keeping the bed moist without drowning it. It's almost magical, except that it's all physics, biology, and centuries of trial and error. You squat back on your heels and watch as willows are planted along the edges, their roots helping anchor the Chinampa in place like living stitches. Now for the part that makes modern permaculturists giddy. This wasn't just about planting stuff and hoping for the best. Aztec farmers practiced careful crop rotation, companion planting, and mulching. They weren't guessing. They knew that soil needed to rest, that certain crops fed others, and that even lake sludge had its limits. This was science, even if it didn't come with lab coats and grant funding. Mainstream historical consensus celebrates Chinampas as one of the most efficient pre-industrial agricultural systems on Earth. But some archaeologists suggest the practice may go back even farther than the Aztecs, with signs of Chinampa-style farming appearing in the remnants of earlier Mesoamerican cultures like the Toltecs. Historians still argue whether the Mexica refined an ancient technique, or dreamed it up themselves while knee-deep in goo. Either way, they made it their own, and scaled it with gusto. You pause to stretch your back and hear laughter nearby. A group of children splash each other with muddy water, their joy unbothered by the smell or the stains. An old woman hollers from a canoe, pretending to scold them while secretly grinning. This isn't just farming. It's community. It's ritual. It's how you mark the seasons, how you teach your kids about gods and weather and worms. Quatley nudges you and points out a tiny shrine nestled at the corner of a finished Chinampa. A small figurine of Tlaloc sits there, his wide eyes forever wet with painted tears. Offerings of beans and feathers are laid at his feet. You're told that before planting each season, families would make prayers here, asking the rain god to keep the balance. Too much water and the Chinampas rot. Too little and they crack. Either way, your crops die and your belly follows. And now, a fringe detail for the curious. Some Chinampas were reportedly used not for farming, but for raising sacred flowers, herbs for ritual use, or even breeding insects like cochineal, the tiny bugs crushed to create vivid red dyes. These boutique Chinampas, if you will, were the high-end horticulture of the empire. You could almost picture a hipster Aztec farmer bragging about his heirloom chili peppers and artisanal bee colony. As you move to the next Chinampa, the mud gets warmer. Sunlight has begun to bake the surface gently, releasing earthy steam. You breathe it in. There's something ancient in it. Something tender. You run your fingers through the soil again and feel how alive it is. Worms curl and retreat. Seeds lie buried like promises waiting to hatch. There's no rush. That's the thing about Chinampa farming, it's unhurried. You work with the rhythms of the lake, the light, the rain. No giant irrigation systems. No machines. Just hands, willows, mud, and time. And maybe a few sore muscles by nightfall. A pair of cranes flies overhead, their wings casting lazy shadows across the water. Somewhere nearby, a frog croaks like it's had a long day. You glance back at your handiwork, one small rectangle of hope, bobbing softly in the shallows. Not bad for a first-timer. As twilight begins to blur the edges of everything, you realize something else. The process isn't just about growing food. It's about shaping the land with care. Chinampas don't conquer the lake. They partner with it. Like little treaties made in mud. And now, because no Aztec day would be complete without a surprise, your foot slips into a canal while stepping off a muddy edge. The water is cold, the splash dramatic, and Quatley laughs so hard he almost drops his paddle. You, soggy but smiling, offer a solemn nod to the ancient tradition of falling in front of your peers. You wring out your tunic and settle back into the canoe. There's a calm that comes after a day of scooping and stacking, of kneeling and planting. The kind of calm that seeps into your bones. You feel it now, as the stars begin to peek through the dusk, their reflections tangled with the water plants below. One Chinampa down. Thousands more across the lake. And behind each one? Hands just like yours. Elbows deep. Patient. Tired. Dreaming. The canoe glides on, and your arms ache in the best way, mud-caked proof that you've joined the ancient fraternity of muckscoopers. Night blankets the lake now, but the city doesn't sleep. Tenochtitlán glows like a necklace of embers laid carefully across the water. You squint and spot torchlight flickering atop pyramids, shimmering reflections doubling everything. And just when you think the day can't offer any more surreal charm, a rhythmic thudding begins to echo in the distance. Drums. Slow, steady, pulsing like a second heartbeat. You tilt your head and listen. The beats coming from the Templo Mayor, the sacred center of the city. Quatli doesn't say anything. He just dips his paddle and steers you toward it, his posture suddenly reverent. This is no ordinary noise. You're about to witness what happens when floating gardens feed a floating empire. Ceremonies. As the city nears, the thudding grows louder, sharper, joined by the shrill of flutes and the deep, hollow calls of conch shells. The air smells of copal resin, incense that swirls up in lazy spirals. You pass beneath an archway strung with marigolds, and the air thickens with reverence. You finally arrive at a landing dock, stepping out onto stone that's still warm from the day's sun. Tenochtitlán at night is something else. Not just beautiful, but electric, alive with reverent energy. People in painted robes walk barefoot toward the temple, offerings in hand. Priests in jaguar skins chant under their breath. A child clutching a maize doll follows a parent in silence. Historians still argue whether these grand evening rituals were strictly calendrical, tied to seasonal change, or performed in response to unexpected omens, like a fireball in the sky, or, an albino snake showing up in someone's kitchen. Either way, they were central to how this society functioned. Feeding the gods was just as important as feeding the people. The drumming continues as you make your way toward the steps of the Templo Mayor. This isn't some isolated spiritual moment. This is the beating heart of an entire worldview. The Aztecs believed that the universe had to be constantly nourished to keep running, like a cosmic engine that runs on prayers, sweat, and sometimes, more tangible offerings. You climb the temple steps slowly. Not because you're out of breath, although yes, thank you, those are steep, but because it feels wrong to rush. Each stair is worn smooth from centuries of bare feet. You think about all the people who've walked this path before you. Farmers, warriors, priests, children, maybe even royalty. At the top, 2 shrines sit side by side. One for Tlaloc, the rain god whose mood swings were legendary, and one for Huitzilopochtli, the sun and war god with a rather aggressive energy. You stand between them, trying to process the enormity of what's around you. Below, the city sprawls like a dream of order, straight lines, bright lights, steady canals. Beyond that? The lake, the Chinampas, the farmers who feed it all. Suddenly, you feel a hand on your shoulder. Quatli, ever your quiet guide, hands you a small bundle wrapped in woven cloth. Inside is amaranth dough shaped into a human figure, decorated with bits of colored seed and feather. It's a tsoali doll, symbolic food offering. You're told to place it at the base of Tlaloc's shrine, along with a few kernels of corn. It feels small, simple, and oddly sacred. The ritual around you swells. Priests chant in tones that rise and fall like waves. A circle of dancers begins to move, barefoot, graceful, each step in time with the drumbeat. Their feathered headdresses ripple in the torchlight, turning them into living flames. It's mesmerizing. You stand there, entranced, as the ceremony pulses around you like a dream you never want to wake from. And here comes your fun fringe detail. Some ceremonies involve the use of hallucinogenic mushrooms, carefully cultivated in the fertile soils of the Chinampas. These sacred fungi were used to help priests see the will of the gods, possibly leading to some of the more abstract architectural choices in this very temple complex. Hey, who's to say the rain god doesn't prefer a little zigzag wall pattern? The drumming slows. The fire burns low. A voice calls out over the crowd, words in Nahuatl you don't understand but feel, somehow, in your chest. A long moment passes in silence. Then people begin to rise and file out, calm and slow, as if the ritual has massaged their souls into butter. You remain behind for a moment, staring out at the lake. The Chinampas stretch beyond sight, their outlines softened in the moonlight. You can almost imagine the hum of plants growing, the quiet persistence of it all. A floating farm system feeding a floating city, and now, floating thoughts in your sleepy head. As you descend the steps again, Quatli offers you a woven cloak. It smells faintly of wood smoke and corn. You drape it around your shoulders and smile. You're one of them now, at least for tonight. A soggy, achy, slightly sunburnt Chinampa apprentice with a soul just a little fuller than when the day began. You pass back into the streets, where life has quieted. The markets are shuttered. Canoes are tied to docks. Zoloid squintly dogs snore in doorways like scaly little guardians of the night. The torches flicker low. And your bed, wherever it is calling. But one last thing before you sleep, you glance back over your shoulder. The temple, the lake, the gardens, they're all still there, lit by stars and memory. It's comforting, somehow, to know that mud and hope built something this enduring. Something that floated, and lasted, and fed. You wake to soft paddling and a sky streaked with pale peach. Morning has returned to the lake, and with it, the quiet shuffle of daily life beginning again. You're curled up in the bottom of a canoe, cloaked, barefoot, and definitely still crusted with yesterday's Chinampa glory. But somehow, it's perfect. The city stirs like a giant stretching its limbs, canals slowly rippling awake. Today, Quatley says, you're meeting the real experts, the farmers who live on the Chinampas full-time. Not nobles, not priests, just the hands that feed the empire. And make no mistake, they're artists. Their canvas? Floating rectangles of fertile muck. Their brushes? Digging sticks, reed baskets, and calloused fingers. Your first stop is a long, narrow Chinampa where 3 generations of one family are already at work. A boy barely old enough to speak chases dragonflies between rows of amaranth, while his grandmother, a wiry legend in her 60s, weeds the maize with the efficiency of a machine, and the attitude of someone who has no time for nonsense. "Late sleeper?" she says, raising an eyebrow when she sees you. It's not a question. It's a diagnosis. You smile sheepishly and kneel to help. The soil is still cool from the night, and the rows are perfectly straight, measured not with rulers, but with sight lines and memory. You follow the pattern and begin pulling weeds, careful not to disturb the squash vines curling between the stalks of maize. This is companion planting at its finest: maize, beans, and squash, the legendary 3 sisters. Maize grows tall and gives the beans a pole to climb. Beans return nitrogen to the soil, feeding the maize. And squash sprawls out low, shading the earth and keeping it moist. It's clever, ancient, and oddly heartwarming. Like a little plant family that's got each other's backs. Here's your historical nugget. Chinampa agriculture was so productive that it could yield up to 7 harvests per year. 7. That's more than some modern farms even dream about. And we're not talking monoculture either. There were tomatoes, chilies, herbs, marigolds, and even medicinal plants, all coexisting in happy chaos. You help carry baskets of harvested greens to the edge of the canal, where a sleek, reed-lined canoe waits. These floating farmers don't just grow food, they deliver it. Fresh produce hits the city markets every morning, paddled in by the very hands that raised it. It's basically a farm-to-table system, but without the overpriced menu and chalkboard typography. You take a moment to help unload the baskets and realize just how much the Aztecs relied on these people. Tenochtitlán was a metropolis of over 200,000 residents at its peak, more than most European cities at the time. Feeding that many mouths on an island? It's no small feat. The Chinampas didn't just make it possible, they made it sustainable. And now, a little-known detail: the floating gardens weren't just practical, they were beautiful. Some families decorated the borders of their Chinampas with flowers, turning their tiny plots into floating bouquets. Color wasn't just for ceremony, it was for joy. You kneel beside a patch of marigolds and run your hand over the petals. They're soft, bright, fragrant, and completely unnecessary. But that's the point. A woman nearby catches you admiring the blooms and hands you a small bundle wrapped in leaves. Inside are edible flowers, bright nasturtiums, tangy and peppery, and the tiniest pickled hibiscus buds. They're snacks. Floral snacks. You're told they're good for digestion and bad moods. You pop one in your mouth, and yeah, they've got a zing that could wake the gods. As you sit and nibble flowers like a divine rabbit, a scholar in a feathered headdress rows by, balancing scrolls in a canoe. You raise an eyebrow. Quatley whispers that he's part of the cow macaque, an elite Aztec school where future priests and leaders study everything from astronomy to herbal medicine to oratory. Some of those medical scrolls, you're told, are filled with knowledge gathered from Chinampa-based healers. Historians still argue whether these healers, usually older women, were recognized as formal doctors or kept to the fringes of official medicine. What we do know, they had answers. For coughs, for fevers, for heartbreak. They brewed, burned, and blessed. Their pharmacies? Right here in the gardens. Want to fix a toothache? Chew this root. Trouble sleeping? Boil these petals. Thinking too much about that cute canoe guy who ghosted you? Rub this flower on your chest and go dance it out. You laugh, and the old farmer nearby smiles with a wink like she's heard that one before. As midday heat thickens the air, the workers take a break. You join them under a shaded canopy of willow branches strung between two canoes. A shared meal appears like magic: corn tamales wrapped in banana leaves, roasted beans, strips of cactus paddles grilled with chili, and small fried insects. Yes, insects. Crunchy, salty, and surprisingly addictive. You're told the flavor depends on where the bugs were raised. Chinampa-fed grasshoppers. Absolute 5-star. You eat in silence for a while, chewing slowly as the lake shimmers in the distance. And here's the thing, there's no rush. No honking horns. No blinking screens. Just the soft lap of water, the buzz of bees, the rustle of reeds. You could get used to this. After the meal, someone brings out a small flute and begins to play. The tune is high and breathy, like birdsong in a dream. A toddler claps offbeat. A canoe glides by with a dog sleeping on the bow, its ears twitching at every note. You lie back on the grass of the Chinampa and let the music wash over you. The earth beneath you floats gently, barely moving. And yet you feel completely grounded, held up by mud, roots, water, and thousands of years of careful hands. The sky dims slightly as a few early clouds roll in. You roll onto your side and study the plants growing beside you. Each one has a story, a use, a purpose. Each one is here because someone figured out how to make a lake sing with life. And as your eyelids drift downward, the last thing you see is a bee disappearing into a sunflower. You hope he's as tired and full as you are. Later that afternoon, the clouds overhead have thickened into lazy gray puffs, just enough to cast a soft filter over the world, like nature dimming the lights for a nap. But instead of curling up and snoozing again, tempting, yes, Quatley insists you visit a part of the lake that most travelers ignore. You drift past the orderly Chinampas you know, grid rows, flowering corners, happy farmers, and head toward the outskirts, where the vegetation thickens and the silence deepens. Here, the floating gardens give way to something wilder, semi-abandoned plots half swallowed by reeds, their canals choked with algae and moss. Welcome to the forgotten edge of the Empire's pantry. The canoe bumps against a floating mat of greenery, and you hop out gingerly, water sloshing into your sandals. You're surrounded by thick undergrowth, vines that curl like lazy snakes, and towering reeds that whisper secrets when the wind passes through. This is a neglected Chinampa, Quatley explains, one that's been given over to nature, or maybe taken back by it. It happens sometimes. A family moves. A lineage ends. The garden grows wild. But forgotten doesn't mean useless. You duck under a low willow branch and gasp. Hidden inside this overgrown mess is a tiny shrine, barely the height of your knee, shaped from clay and crumbling stone. It's dedicated to Chantico, the goddess of hearth and fire, and curiously, volcanoes and precious things. People left tokens here: a cracked maize doll, a ring of dried peppers, a child's rattle made from squash seeds. Quatley tells you, in a hushed tone, that some Chinamperos believe abandoned gardens carry spirits, good ones, mostly. Guardians. Ancestors. Maybe a mischievous wind god or two. People still visit sometimes, leaving offerings for luck, especially before planting or harvest. Historians still argue whether these shrines were officially sanctioned parts of the Aztec religion or just tolerated folk practices. They weren't exactly listed in the priestly manuals, but no one dared say they weren't real. Not when a forgotten Chinampa could suddenly yield a bumper crop, or flood unexpectedly if neglected too long. You sit beside the shrine and light a small incense bundle from Quatli's pack. The smoke curls upward, carrying prayers and maybe a bit of mosquito repellent. It's strangely moving. This little altar, half buried and overlooked, has a kind of quiet gravity. You're not sure what you believe, but you whisper a few words anyway, just in case. And now for your fringe fact of the day. Some Aztec farmers trained dogs, not to herd animals, because, let's face it, there weren't many domestic livestock, but to scout land. These dogs, usually the hairless Xoloitzcuintli, could sniff out overly damp soil, warn of pests, and even sense subtle shifts in wind patterns before storms. Like muddy little barometers with pointy ears. You chuckle, imagining a dog barking at a squash vine because a thunderstorm is coming. Nature's weatherman, wagging his tail. As you move deeper into the neglected plots, you notice something unusual. A patch of soil that seems wrong. It's darker, denser, spongier underfoot. Quatli taps it with his digging stick and frowns. This section hasn't just been abandoned, it's sinking. You kneel and scoop a handful. The mud is too loose, the roots too sparse. Without the careful layering and upkeep, the Chinampa is dissolving back into the lake. The garden is unmaking itself. It's haunting, but also poetic. Without human hands to bind it, shape it, build those clever underwater fences, the floating island simply gives up and returns to water. No tragedy. Just entropy. This is the delicate balance the Aztecs managed to master. Chinampas were never fully tamed land. They were controlled chaos, constantly monitored, coaxed, cajoled. Miss a season or two of maintenance, and they start to unravel, like a sweater with a pulled thread. Quatli tells you that Chinampa building was considered a community responsibility, not just a family task. Neighbors helped reinforce canals, repaired sinking corners, and even held annual mud drives. Yes, mud drives, where everyone scooped and shoveled together. Think barn raising, but wetter. He laughs and adds that some families made a party of it, complete with music, fermented agave drinks, and tamales shaped like little ducks. Because, obviously, the only thing better than scooping mud is doing it while mildly buzzed and holding a poultry-shaped snack. As you paddle out of the forgotten garden zone, you spot one more curious thing. A raft-like structure bobbing in a shallow canal, stacked with clay pots and sticks. Quatli explains it's an old method for reclaiming damaged Chinampas. People would float compost-heavy rafts over sinking zones to seed new root systems. Like putting down a life raft for the earth itself. You touch one of the pots and notice small seedlings sprouting inside. Even in decay, there's hope. The paddle back is quiet. The wind has picked up slightly, ruffling the water and making the lake shimmer like hammered silver. You feel the weight of everything you've seen, the living gardens, the ghost plots, the tiny goddess altar, the singing flute under the willows. Somehow, this place feels more real than any stone pyramid or golden idol. Because this quiet, muddy, buzzing mess is where daily life thrived. It fed the temples. It stocked the markets. It kept the empire's belly full and its spirit rooted. And it did so one scoop of mud, one reed fence, one sprouting bean at a time. Back near the active Chinampas, the smell of grilled chilies returns on the breeze. A heron watches you from the canal's edge, utterly unbothered by your existence. A child waves from a distant canoe, the movement setting off a small chorus of dogs barking in reply. And just as the sun peeks out from behind the clouds, you realize something. The magic of Tenochtitlán isn't just in its pyramids, or its rituals. It's here, in the parts of the world that float and sink. In the stubborn beauty of things not built to last forever. You sit down on the edge of a Chinampa, feet dangling in the water, and let the silence stretch. Not empty. Just full of things you don't need to say out loud. A few hours later, Quatli gestures toward a narrow, reed-lined channel that snakes away from the main garden areas. We're going to see the builders now, he says with a grin. The mud scoopers. You nod, intrigued, and the canoe pushes off again, gliding into an area where the water smells richer, earthier, like it's thick with stories, not just silt. The channel opens into a shallow lagoon where the water's barely knee-deep. All around, teams of men and women wade through the muck, hauling baskets, dragging reed mats, and jabbing long poles into the lakebed. It's not elegant work. It's splashy. It's squishy. It's 1000% a ruin your good shoes kind of day. And here's the headline: these are the people who build the floating gardens, literally from the ground up. If farming is an art, Chinampa construction is performance sculpture, but with more mosquitoes. You're handed a digging stick called a COA, shaped like a long, flat paddle. It's heavier than it looks and requires a rhythm you definitely do not have yet. One of the builders, a stocky man with a cheerful scowl, shows you how it's done. Jab into the muck, twist, lift, dump. Jab, twist, lift, dump. It's hypnotic. Messy. And you immediately feel your biceps asking if you really thought this trip would be relaxing. You jab too hard once and fall face first into the mud. Welcome to the club. Everyone laughs, warmly, not mockingly, and someone hands you a woven cloth to clean off. The smell is rich, like rain and roots and history. Here's your mainstream fact of the day: to build a Chinampa, you don't just dump mud anywhere. First, you drive stakes, usually willow branches, into the lakebed in a rectangle. Then you weave reed fences between them to create a kind of underwater basket. Into this, you pack layers of mud, decayed vegetation, lake algae, and more reeds until you've built a solid mass above the waterline. Over time, the willow stakes take root and become living fences, stabilizing the garden. Yes, your fence literally turns into a tree. Nature 1, Home Depot 0. The process is slow but strangely satisfying. You join a crew shoving mud into place, working with the sticky, heavy rhythm of people who've done this their whole lives. Your arms ache. Your back protests. But you keep going. One of the older women, who wears a necklace of tiny carved maize kernels, tells you stories as you scoop. She says each Chinampa has a soul, and if you mistreat it, by planting greedily or ignoring it when it sags, it sulks. That's when the crops start to fail. When you feel a cold spot on a warm day. When you hear frogs where there are none. Historians still argue whether beliefs like this were common among the general Aztec population or just localized superstitions. But when you're knee-deep in Black Lake muck and your arm hairs rise for no good reason, well, you stop scoffing. You scoop a little more gently. You pat the mud like you're tucking in a child. Just in case. A young apprentice explains how they measure water levels using floating gourds, simple but effective. If the gourd dips too much near a corner, the island's sinking on that side. It's like a carpentry bubble level but made from fruit. That's innovation you can eat. Your quirky tidbit for today? Some Chinampa builders claim that singing to the mud made it settle better. You raise an eyebrow, and Quatley just shrugs. Helps with the rhythm, he says. Then, dead serious, he starts humming a low, wordless tune while shoveling. You laugh, and join in. Before long, the entire team is grunting out muddy harmonies between shovelfuls. Honestly, it kind of works. You feel synced up, like the whole swamp is breathing with you. As the sun climbs higher, someone shouts and gestures toward a long raft approaching. It's stacked with bundles of reeds and fragrant compost wrapped in woven mats. The delivery arrives just in time. The crew is ready to layer it onto the base you've been helping build. You help unroll the mats and smooth them into place. Under your hands, the compost is warm, still gently steaming from fermentation. This is the soul food of the Chinampa, rich in nutrients drawn from decomposed lake plants and kitchen waste. You catch the sharp tang of chili stems and something that might once have been squash. It's pungent. It's oddly comforting. A pause in the work gives you a chance to ask what happens when the lake floods. Do the Chinampas ever wash away? Quatley grins and points to a series of hidden anchoring methods. Heavy rocks tucked into corners, clever canal barriers, and this one's a favorite, clumps of floating hyacinths woven into chains and tied to submerged tree roots. It's a floating garden with a parking brake. You sit down on the edge of a half-finished plot and dangle your feet into the water. Tiny fish nibble your toes. A dragonfly lands on your knee like it owns the place. You don't move. Then a younger boy, not more than 10, runs up and dumps a reed basket of freshly cut tezontle, a porous volcanic rock, beside you. We use it on top, he says proudly. Keeps the mud from cracking in the sun. And you realize, it's not just dirt. It's a system. Every detail has a reason. Every layer has a purpose. You help lay the last mat over the fresh compost and pat it down like a baker smoothing dough. Tomorrow, someone will plant here, maize, maybe, or herbs. Within days, it will start to green. Within weeks, it'll be part of the living lake again. And now you know what it took. You're caked in grime, your hands are blistered, and you're pretty sure there's mud inside your earlobes. But you've never felt more grounded. Literally and emotionally. As the crew wraps up for the day, someone passes around a drink called atoll, a warm, thick corn beverage laced with cinnamon and cacao. It's like drinking breakfast. You sip, sigh, and stretch out on the finished Chinampa under the widening sky. A heron struts nearby, eyeing you like he's not entirely convinced you belong. Fair. But you're getting closer. You're not just visiting the gardens anymore. You're helping build them. And in that moment, as the mud cools and the lake breeze brushes your face, you feel something you didn't expect. Pride. Later that evening, with your muscles still groaning and your fingers permanently dyed in shades of earthy brown, Quatley takes you to see a Chinampa that's different. You've seen gardens growing maize, squash, beans. You've seen flower plots so vivid they make your retinas feel like they're watching a soap opera. But this Chinampa is quiet. Smaller. Carefully hidden behind a curtain of dense reeds. As you duck into the clearing, you understand why. Rows of herbs lie before you, tiny green shoots, delicate leaves, and stalks that smell like ancient spells when you brush past them. This, Quatley explains in a hushed voice, is a medicinal Chinampa. And it's magic. Not the wand-waving kind, but the kind that hums low and steady under your ribs. The kind you feel when you're standing somewhere that has healed people for generations. Tonight, you're stepping into the green laboratory of Aztec herbalists, the Tenochtitlán, the healers of Tenochtitlán. And their tools? Not test tubes or stethoscopes, but mud, leaves, roots, and prayer. The air smells like sweet basil, wet stone, and something sharp you can't quite place. Quatley plucks a leaf and tells you its episode, used for digestion. A few steps farther and he shows you tlalcaquinol, bark powder used for respiratory illnesses. Another patch houses Tenochtitlán, a white herb for fever and pain. You crouch and gently touch the soil, still warm from the day's sun, still pulsing with life. Here's your mainstream fact. The Aztecs had an official medical codex, the Badianus manuscript, compiled just after the Spanish arrived. It listed dozens of native plants and their uses, showing how advanced and structured Aztec medicine truly was. This wasn't a guessing game. It was a system. A science. A soft splash draws your attention. A young woman approaches, a reed basket balanced on her hip. She wears a tunic dyed with marigold and carries herself like someone born with knowledge in her bones. This is Tenochtitlán, one of the local healers. She greets you with a nod and starts plucking leaves and cutting stems, explaining each plant's use in a voice that could coax a fever to break. She shows you how to make a poultice from crushed Quetzalcoatl, the poinsettia. Yes, really, it's not just for Christmas decor, for skin inflammation. You mash the leaves with a stone and smear it on a scratch from your earlier mud dive. The relief is real. Immediate. Like a whisper from the earth. Your quirky tidbit? Some Aztec doctors used obsidian blades so sharp they could cut at a microscopic level, so precise that modern surgical researchers actually studied them in the 20th century. Obsidian, 1. Stainless steel, 0. You picture a healer dicing herbs with a glassy black sliver of mountain, and suddenly modern scissors seem kind of dull. Tenochtitlán then offers you a cup of tea made from Yloxochitl, the heart flower. It smells like vanilla and dreams. She tells you it calms anxiety and promotes lucid dreaming. Good for when your thoughts race like deer, she says. You sip, and wow, your brain starts to purr like a cat in sunlight. Historians still argue whether Aztec healers were viewed as full-fledged professionals or spiritual intermediaries working in the shadow of priests. The truth is probably both. They treated wounds and dreams. They knew how to set a broken bone and interpret what it meant when a hawk circled your house at dusk. Body and spirit weren't separate things. You healed both, or you healed neither. You walk through the garden as the light fades, each step crunching gently on reed mats laid between rows. Tiny clay figurines hide among the plants, animal shapes, miniature gods, perhaps left as thanks or insurance. One, shaped like a jaguar, has a cracked paw and a sprig of basil tucked behind its ear. Medicine has a sense of humor too, apparently. Tenochtitlán sits cross-legged near the water's edge and starts grinding seeds into a paste with a stone mortar. She's making a remedy for a child with fever: chili seeds, crushed maize, river water, and the cool dash of burnt willow. You raise an eyebrow. "It doesn't taste good," she warns, but the fever runs away like a scared rabbit. And there's your reminder: healing isn't always pretty. Sometimes it's bitter and gritty and smells like burned wood. But it works. She smiles and hands you a final sprig, Tetsmittle, a gray-green plant used for sleeplessness. "Put it under your pillow," she says. "It won't stop the dreams, but it'll make them kind." You tuck it behind your ear for now, letting its scent lull your shoulders into a slower rhythm. As you sit there, the fireflies begin to blink on, one by one. The medicinal Chinampa glows with soft light and low voices, the quiet hum of people who spend their lives pulling pain out of others and planting peace in its place. You watch Tenochtitlán wrap her herbs into cloth bundles, mark each with a charcoal symbol, and slip them into her basket like sacred tools. You think back to that earlier shrine on the abandoned Chinampa and realize something. Whether it's a healer grinding seeds or a farmer coaxing squash from muck, this whole world runs on belief. Belief in soil, in plants, in cycles, in the idea that something small and green and tender can hold enough power to stop a cough, close a wound, or keep a heart from cracking in two. And suddenly you feel very, very lucky to be here, not as a patient, not even as a tourist, but as a witness. A guest in a garden where people whisper to leaves and expect answers. As Quatley guides you back to the canoe, your shoes squish softly, and your thoughts trail behind you like steam rising from tea. You glance over your shoulder at the garden once more. Tenochtitlán waves. You wave back. Your pocket is full of herbs. Your mind is full of peace. Your dreams, tonight, are going to smell amazing. Back in the canoe, you stretch your legs and lean against a bundle of maize husks. The moon's rising, full, luminous, and apparently auditioning for its own Aztec myth. Quatley doesn't say much as he pulls you forward, letting the quiet settle over the water like a silk blanket. The city is out there somewhere, glittering on the horizon like a bowl of embers. But you're not going back just yet. Instead, he steers toward a wide, open section of the lake where the Chinampas fall away and the sky opens like a book. The stars are sharp. The air turns crisp. And up ahead, something strange flickers in the dark, floating lanterns. "Night farmers," Quatley murmurs, nodding toward the lights. You squint, and there they are. Teams of people gliding across the water in low canoes, their paths lit by small clay bowls of fire tethered to their prows. It's eerie, beautiful, and absolutely not OSHA compliant. Still, it works. You can see them casting nets, tending crops under the moon, whispering to the lake like they're gossiping with an old friend. Yes, even under the stars, the floating gardens are alive. Tonight you're learning about the quiet workers, the nighttime Chinampas who slip between reeds while the world sleeps. The city may run on sunlit tribute and daily labor, but here, it breathes by moonlight too. You dock near a floating platform, where two men and a woman are carefully transplanting seedlings. A low fire keeps their hands warm, and one of them hums a tune older than the temples. You're welcomed with the same casual grace you've come to expect in this world, like you've always belonged here, even if your sandals squeak awkwardly. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Aztecs utilized every daylight hour, and many non-daylight hours, for agriculture. Because the Chinampas were such efficient systems, they often supported multiple crop cycles a year. That meant farming wasn't just a sunrise to noon affair, it was a 24-hour ecosystem. Especially during crucial times like the maize growing season or when flooding threatened vulnerable plots. A young boy hands you a bundle of night-grown collites, wild greens eaten like spinach. They glisten with dew and hum with chlorophyll. You try one raw. It's bitter and sweet and tastes like the lake's secret language. Best picked under the moon, the boy says, deadpan. Sun makes them dramatic. You chuckle. Noted. The firelight dances on water as one of the farmers, his name is Matlal, tells you about their rhythm. They nap during the hottest hours of the day and rise again as dusk falls. Their world is mapped not by clocks but by frog song and the tilt of constellations. The Pleiades, for instance, tell them when to water certain herbs. Orion's rise marks the start of the cooler winds. Your quirky tidbit of the night? Some Chinampa farmers swore by moonwashing their crops, leaving young plants out overnight specifically to absorb the full moon's light. Whether it helped with growth or just kept the gardeners feeling mystic, no one's sure. But it's a ritual that's still whispered about in some lake towns even today. Historians still argue whether such nocturnal practices were widespread or mostly tied to specific cults of the moon goddess Kozakwi. Some believe they were tied to agricultural astrology, others to fertility rites. But down here you realize it doesn't really matter. When you're knee-deep in lake water at midnight, every little superstition starts to feel like a reasonable precaution. You join Matlal in replanting some maize stalks that have slumped. The technique's precise. Lift, fluff the base, re-anchor with a wiggle that's more art than science. It's a dance, really. One he learned from his grandmother, and she from hers. You wonder how far back that chain stretches. Generations? Centuries? Far enough that your clumsy hands feel like a blip in a very long story. At one point, Quatley taps your shoulder and points upward. Hear that? You pause. At first, just crickets. But then, a slow croak. Then another. A full-on frog chorus tuning up under the stars. They're early, Matlal murmurs. Rain's coming. No apps, no radar. Just amphibians with better weather sense than half the internet. The woman, Zoko, who has a laugh like wind in tall grass, starts covering the seedlings with palm mats. Too much rain drowns the little ones, she says, more to the plants than to you. You help, careful to tuck the edges in like burritos. Somewhere along the way, you forget about your sore arms. Your breath slows to match the lake's tempo. You could fall asleep right here on this bobbing raft, blanket of stars overhead, reed mat pillow, your head full of chlorophyll. You won't though. You're handed a cup of pozol, a fermented corn drink that tastes like fizzy oatmeal and wakefulness. It kicks just enough to keep your eyes open, just enough to make you grin. For a moment, no one speaks. The lanterns drift. A fish splashes somewhere in the dark. Someone on a far-off Chinampa sings a lullaby. You don't understand the words, but the sound fits the night perfectly, low, wistful, full of cradle-sway rhythm. And it hits you, this entire city runs on things you'll never see in a museum. Not the pyramids, not the feathered cloaks, but this, mud between toes, roots tangled in dreams, moonlit crops that only grow if sung to. These gardens aren't just growing food. They're growing memory. And you, for one very strange and wonderful night, are part of it. As you rise to leave, Matlal presses something into your palm. A tiny clay frog, rough and warm from his pocket. For luck, he says. Or rain. You slide it into your pouch, next to your herbs, next to the dried tetsmittel from the healer. You don't know what dreams tonight will bring. But whatever they are, they'll come on lily pads. Dawn slides in slowly, like someone trying not to wake the house. The lake takes its time changing colors. Inky black becomes gunmetal gray, then finally soft gold. You sit cross-legged in the canoe, cupping your hands around a warm bowl of atoll, that thick, sweet corn drink that basically hugs your throat on the way down. It's still early enough that your breath fogs slightly when you exhale. Quatley stands at the stern, silent, steady, watching the eastern sky crack open like a ripe fruit. Today's adventure, food. And not just. Here's some maize. Food. You're going full on Aztec farm to table, minus the $16 green juice and exposed brick. He nudges the canoe toward another cluster of Chinampas. These look even more carefully tended than the others, small, precise, almost ornamental. The plants here are edible, yes, but also bursting with color. Marigolds grow between patches of amaranth. Prickly pear cacti wave lazily at passing birds. Chili bushes, already heavy with red and green fruit, lean together like gossiping ants. Your feet hit the damp planks of a floating dock, and immediately a young girl in a brilliant magenta tunic appears, carrying a tray of tamales. Yes, tamales. Steamed in corn husks over an earth oven built into the island itself. She offers you one with a grin. You unwrap it like a present and bite in. Bean, squash blossom, and a burst of chili that wakes up your brain like a morning slap. Time for your mainstream historical fact. The Chinampas weren't just high yield. They were culinary treasure troves. The Aztec diet was rich, varied, and astonishingly vegetarian by modern standards. Maize, beans, squash, of course. But also chia seeds, tomatoes, avocados, cactus fruit, amaranth, and even spirulina. Yep, that trendy green algae powder you see in overpriced smoothies? The Aztecs were harvesting it off lake surfaces centuries ago. One elder, Tenoch, invites you to walk with him through the plots. He stoops slightly, hands always busy plucking weeds or pinching soil. He shows you how maize and beans grow together, the three sisters, method you may have learned about in school, where each plant supports the others. Maize offers height, beans climb and fix nitrogen, and squash shades the soil. Efficient. Elegant. Like nature's version of a group chat that actually works. He pulls off a chili and warns you. This one's for your enemies. You believe him. Your quirky tidbit? The Aztecs made chocolate, but not the kind you're thinking of. It wasn't sweet. It was a bitter, spicy drink, sometimes flavored with chili or flower petals, and reserved for nobility, warriors, and the gods. Regular folks didn't drink it daily, and if you showed up with a frappuccino in Tenochtitlán, someone might assume you were royalty. Or possessed. Tenoch shares some zacalado with you from a frothy clay bowl. The first sip is jarring, sharp, earthy, and oddly satisfying. Like coffee, but if it had a degree in anthropology. You keep walking, and soon reach the amaranth beds, deep red leaves and tiny golden grains. Sacred, Tenoch says. Banned later. And you remember reading how the Spanish, uneasy with its ritual uses, tried to eliminate it. But here it is. Still growing. Still defiant. Historians still argue whether the Aztec diet was deliberately shaped by spiritual restrictions or simply born of necessity. No large domesticated animals meant no milk, no cheese, no steaks. But did they want those things? Or were they perfectly happy with a chili and corn feast life? Either way, the results are undeniable: strong, lean bodies, fast runners, and warriors who could hike for days on tortillas and beans alone. You stop to help with the morning harvest, Quetzalcoatl leaves for spice, zytomatal, tomatoes for sauces, squash blossoms for stuffing. Every plant is handled like something valuable. Not just because it's food, but because someone's life depends on it. Several someones, actually. Nearby, a woman named Isel is preparing a communal meal. Flat stones are heating over coals, and she's patting out tortillas with a speed that makes your jaw drop. No press. No rolling pin. Just hands, rhythm, and magic. She gestures for you to try. Your first tortilla comes out shaped like disappointment. Isel laughs and gives it to her dog. Now you know why we start learning at 3. She teases, and hands you another ball of dough. Eventually, you get one that's vaguely circular and less floppy. It's passed down the line, filled with mashed beans, avocado, salsa, and wrapped tight. You eat it on the edge of the Chinampa, feet dangling over the water, birds wheeling overhead like impatient kitchen critics. And it's perfect. Not Michelin star. Perfect. Not Instagram-worthy. Perfect. Just perfect. Because you helped grow it. Pick it. Wrap it. Because it tastes like effort and sun and hands that know exactly what they're doing. Izel tells you stories while she works, of the maize goddess Chicamcotl, whose blessings are folded into every tortilla, of grandmothers who could tell the weather by how beans cooked, of kids who once shaped tamales to look like tiny fish and called them lake spirits. One little girl, barefoot, hair full of marigold petals, offers you a tamale shaped like a frog. You name him Enrique before eating his delicious little face. As the sun climbs higher, the Chinampa buzzes with energy. Farmers ferry crates to the mainland market. Kids run with bundles of herbs. One canoe pulls away with a full load of maize, the stalks stacked higher than the paddler's head. Before you go, Tenoch hands you a bundle wrapped in palm, more tamales, 2 avocados, a pinch of salt, and a slice of roasted squash. For your journey, he says. And you think, this is the journey. This soft balance between labor and reward, between harvest and sharing. No doorbells, no tips, no receipts, just a food culture grown with care, eaten with gratitude. You step back into the canoe, pouch heavier, stomach full, fingers stained with chili and chocolate. Quatley raises the pole and pushes off. The floating garden drifts behind, the scent of roasted corn still clinging to your shirt. Your feet dangle. Your eyes close. And somewhere in your mind, Enrique the tamale frog hops across a plate of dreams, smiling. The canoe glides onward, its wooden belly slicing through lily-padded water with the ease of a whispered secret. Your stomach is full, your hands are dusty, and your mind is doing that happy floaty thing that happens after a satisfying meal and way too much sun. But you're not done yet. Not even close. Because now you're headed toward the heartbeat of this entire system. The people who make it work, not by farming or harvesting, but by building the Chinampas themselves. Yes, the quiet engineers of mud and willpower, the scoopers, shapers, and stackers. You see them before you hear them, figures in the shallows, bent like question marks, mud dripping from woven baskets, laughter mixing with the occasional grunt of effort. This is a Chinampa under construction. It looks like a soggy patch of mayhem, but give it a season and it'll be a floating garden worthy of the gods. You hop out of the canoe and immediately sink ankle-deep in soft, clingy sludge. You glance back at Quatley. He shrugs. Welcome to the workshop. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Building a Chinampa wasn't just slapping mud on a raft and tossing seeds around like fairy dust. It was a meticulous, back-breaking process that could take months. Workers, often organized by Kalpuli, neighborhood or clan groups, would mark off a rectangular section of shallow lake, drive in wooden stakes to define the edges, and weave together walls using reeds and willow branches. Then came the mud. Layers of lake sediment, decayed vegetation, and rich muck were scooped up with baskets or large conch shells and poured into the enclosure, layer after layer until the plot was firm, fertile, and ready to support crops. The mud didn't just come from anywhere either. It was handpicked from the richest parts of the lake floor, places where algae, fish droppings, and centuries of organic material had brewed into a dark, nutrient-rich stew. You meet a man named Tenochtitlán, named after the god of pulque. He's got arms like tree trunks and mud streaked up to his shoulders. He hands you a scoop, a deep bowl made from a hollowed gourd, and nods toward the lakebed. Go on, he says. Scoop some clouds. You wade in. It's warm, thick, and squishes between your toes like pudding that's decided to fight back. You dip the scoop, drag it through the silt, and lift. It's heavier than expected, like lifting a sleeping cat made of chocolate mousse. You dump the sludge into the marked Chinampa space. Again. And again. And again. Your back starts to ache. Your hair sticks to your forehead. But somewhere around the fifth scoop, something clicks. The rhythm of it, the give of the mud, the sound of slop meeting earth, it becomes meditative. Your quirky tidbit for the day? Some workers used to mix crushed chili peppers into the outer layers of Chinampas to keep rodents and pests away. Imagine getting a snoot full of ghost pepper while trying to nibble on someone's squash roots. Effective? Maybe. Hilarious to imagine? Definitely. Tenochtitlán explains that Chinampa building was often a communal effort. You didn't just build one for yourself, you helped others in your clan, knowing they'd help you in turn. Sort of like barn raising, but with more mosquitoes and way more mud in your socks. Historians still argue whether the labor system was strictly voluntary or if there was subtle pressure from the nobility to contribute. Either way, the results were astonishing. By the time the Spanish arrived, hundreds, possibly thousands of Chinampas stretched across the valley like floating patchwork. Each one handcrafted, fed by canals, and supported by massive china middle trees at the corners. Those tall willows you saw earlier, their roots still drinking deeply from the lake. You pause for a break, sitting on a half-built plot while someone passes around tepach, a fermented pineapple drink that tastes like carbonated sunshine. One of the younger workers, a girl named Malinali, tells you about how her mother used to sing songs to the mud, old, wordless tunes said to encourage balance and fertility. She hums one for you. It's gentle and strange, the kind of melody you imagine frogs might appreciate. Someone tosses you a piece of roasted camote, sweet potato, sticky and dark from fire. You bite in, and the caramelized sugar warms your soul straight through. Nearby, others are reinforcing the edge of the Chinampa with woven mats of ahujote roots and river reeds. It looks delicate, but the result is surprisingly strong, sort of like how grandma's quilts feel like battle armor when you're sick. Another man, older, with a face like an old canoe and eyes that twinkle even under mud, taps your shoulder. "We call the mud Tlali Mama," he says. Mother Earth. It's not a metaphor. The reverence is real. They treat this squelchy, lake-bottom mixture with the kind of respect most people save for holy relics or fresh laundry. Because here, the earth isn't just where you walk, it's what feeds you, cradles you, and gets under your fingernails in the best way. You keep scooping. You keep laughing. Someone slips and face plants into a shallow patch, and there's a round of cheers and clapping. Even that feels right. This isn't sterile, modern farming. This is dirt and calluses agriculture. It's messy. It's exhausting. It's ridiculously beautiful. And it works. By late afternoon, the Chinampa is visibly rising. What was once just marked water is now a muddy rectangle of promise. Saplings will be planted along the edges tomorrow. Seeds will follow. And in a few months, this very spot will be brimming with food and flowers and frogs and fireflies. You stand back with the crew, admiring the half-formed garden. It looks like nothing. It looks like everything. You can already see it in your mind, maize as tall as you, marigolds bobbing in the breeze, tomatoes fat and warm on the vine. Tenochtitlán slaps your shoulder and grins. Not bad for your first time. You'll be sore tomorrow. That's how you know it worked. You believe him. Every scoop was a stitch in a larger fabric, one that stretches back centuries and still hasn't unraveled. Back in the canoe, the paddle dips and lifts, and your eyelids do the same. Your body aches. Your heart doesn't. The sun tips westward now, warm gold turning to bronze. The lake catches it all, every ripple burnished like liquid metal. You're back in the canoe, lazily trailing your fingers through the water. Quatley is quiet, paddling with the rhythm of someone who's part reed, part human. He doesn't say where you're going next, but there's a certain ceremonial glint in his eye that makes you sit up straighter. Ahead, a larger Chinampa looms into view, wide, squared-off edges, carefully pruned trees, and rows of young priests in long tunics. It's not a garden. It's not a house. It's a temple. A floating one. You drift toward it, slow and reverent, like entering someone's dream. This isn't one of the massive pyramids of Tenochtitlán, mind you. No feathered stone behemoth here. But the reverence, the hum, the scent of copal rising like ghost smoke from a clay brazier, it's got weight. Even the air feels different, thick with invisible threads of belief and ancient memory. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Aztecs didn't just use Chinampas for farming. Some were dedicated to ceremonial use, tiny floating shrines to agricultural deities, especially those connected to fertility, growth, and rain. Imagine a floating prayer, half rooted in earth, half dancing on water. A boy priest, barefoot, hair slick with some kind of flower oil, approaches and beckons you forward. You obey. Not because you're scared, okay, maybe a little, but because everything here feels sacred in a way that asks for silence and good posture. He leads you to a low altar. Flowers are piled there, mostly marigolds and deep purple dahlias. A tiny sculpture of Tlaloc, god of rain, sits in the center. His round, goggle eyes seem to stare straight into your over-caffeinated soul. Water jugs line the edges. Bundles of maize. A single frog, alive and supremely unconcerned, sits nestled near a clay whistle. Your quirky tidbit: frogs were seen as divine messengers, linked to water, to Tlaloc, and to the promise of rain. Their croaks were music to the ears of farmers. In fact, some Chinampa priests trained kids to mimic frog sounds during rituals. Yes, ritual rib biting. The original amphibian choir. One boy performs just such a croak now. It's alarmingly accurate. Somewhere in the reeds, an actual frog responds, and suddenly, you're front row for the weirdest call and response in Mesoamerican spiritual history. A short ceremony begins. A bowl of water is passed around. Each person dips in a finger and touches it to their forehead. You follow suit. The water is cold, impossibly pure, scooped from a sacred spring canal nearby, you're told. Then the maize is blessed. A few kernels are tossed into the lake. The breeze picks up as if on cue. Historians still argue whether these floating temples were widespread or localized, personal innovations. There's no formal blueprint, no one-size-fits-all god raft. Some suggest they were extensions of household shrines, others believe they were communal, a Chinampa's spiritual anchor. What's certain is this: the Aztecs didn't separate the sacred and the practical. Growing food and praising gods were fingers of the same hand. You're invited to help with a small offering, petals, water, and a whisper of thanks. You hesitate. What exactly are you thanking? The mud? The maize? The clouds that haven't broken yet but might, if you ask nicely? You whisper something anyway. As the ritual ends, the priest kids break into giggles, tossing flower heads at each other. Turns out even divine frog choristers are still kids. You're handed a flute. Not a modern, silver concert flute. This one's clay, spiral-shaped, with holes in places your fingers don't expect. You blow. It makes a sound like a startled duck. Everyone laughs. Including Tlaloc, probably. To one side of the shrine is a small reading circle, stone etchings, bark paper codices, some kind of carved map of water routes and celestial alignments. You trace one line with your finger. It connects maize planting days to phases of Venus. Another shows which days are favorable for chili harvest, based on cloud cover and frog activity. Yes, frog activity again. Frogs are having a real moment today. A girl named Itzayana, maybe 12, but with the quiet seriousness of someone 80, explains that Chinampa priests also served as astronomers. They track stars from these floating platforms. Less light pollution. Clearer skies. And anyway, everything, plants, rain, births, even mud-scooping days, was tied to the heavens. You lean back on your elbows, gaze upward. The sun is dipping fast now, splashing orange on the lake like spilled paint. One of the boys lights small candles on lily pads and sets them adrift. 100 tiny flames drifting silently in all directions. A waterborne sky. Someone starts singing, a lullaby, slow and laced with notes that seem to hover just above the water. You don't recognize the words, but you don't need to. The song curls around your bones. You hum along, just a little. Before you leave, the boy priest hands you a flower crown. Not ironic. Not for selfies. Just a circle of marigolds and lake grass, still damp and cool against your forehead. Now you carry the garden with you, he says seriously. You look out at the candlelit lake, your mud-stained hands, the maize kernels stuck to your sleeves. He's right. Quatley signals. Time to go. As the canoe pushes off, the floating shrine fades into the twilight. Just another shadow on the water now, flickering and almost not there. You breathe deep. Water, smoke, petals, flute notes, frog songs. It's all part of the same current. And you? You're floating right in the middle of it. Night has fully wrapped its velvet shawl around the Valley of Mexico. The moon floats pale and unbothered overhead, its reflection shivering across the lake. Stars blink slowly to life. You lie back in the canoe, knees bent, fingers trailing lazy patterns in the water. But your ride's not over. Quatley gives you a quiet nudge with the paddle. Still one more stop, he says. And this one dances. You blink. Dances? The canoe glides on through a maze of narrow canals, guided more by memory than sight now. Fireflies dot the reeds like embers, and somewhere ahead, you hear the gentle thump of drums. Not a thunderous war rhythm, no, this is a heartbeat rhythm. Something ancestral and slow, like a lullaby tapped on ribs. Then the light hits you, warm glows from reed torches lining the shore of yet another Chinampa. But this one's alive. You see shadows moving, music lifting, laughter threading through the night air. You've arrived at a Chinampa fiesta, a nighttime celebration, equal parts community gathering, dance party, and snackapalooza. Yes, that's the technical term. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Aztec society celebrated agricultural success and the changing of seasons with festivals. Some of these were empire-wide, tied to the solar calendar, while others were more local, marked by neighborhood groups, kalpuli, that gathered to honor their own deities, harvests, and rituals. Floating gardens weren't excluded. In fact, Chinampa communities often hosted small-scale festivities right on the plots, using cleared space for dances, offerings, and food. Tonight is one such festival. You're told it's in honor of Xilanen, goddess of young maize. It's a green corn celebration, right at the sweet spot when the first tender cobs are ready to roast, but before the full harvest. You're ushered off the canoe and handed, what else? A warm tamal wrapped in a corn husk, fragrant with cinnamon and squash blossoms. You bite in. It's perfect. Like edible moonlight. A group of dancers begins to circle a fire at the center of the Chinampa. They wear skirts made from woven reeds, bodies painted with spirals of blue and gold. One of them is Quatley's cousin, apparently. She winks at you before dropping into a low, rolling spin that makes you question whether gravity applies on floating gardens. Your quirky tidbit: some Chinampa dances were done barefoot in shallow water, as a symbolic act of communion with the lake. Tonight's version is a dryfoot dance, but several children splash along the edges in a watery rhythm section of their own. One kid even ties small bells to her ankles, creating a sound halfway between wind chimes and uncoordinated jingling. It's chaotic. It's joyful. It's exactly right. A band plays from the corner, drums, clay flutes, a rasping instrument that sounds like a jaguar clearing its throat. You join a circle of older women sitting with woven baskets of elote and chapulines, toasted grasshoppers. You politely decline the grasshoppers. They politely don't take offense. The woman beside you, Nenadal, explains the real purpose of the party. To thank the corn while it's still soft. To thank the rain for holding off. To remind the children that food grows from mud and love. You think about that. It tracks. Historians still argue whether these local Chinampa festivals were permitted, encouraged, or ignored by the larger religious authorities in Tenochtitlán. While the empire's priests were strict about major rituals and sacrifices, there's evidence that communities maintained folk traditions and regional gods quietly and peacefully. The floating gardens, being slightly removed from the stone and smoke heart of the city, offered space for these practices to breathe. The fire pops, sending a brief spray of sparks skyward. A girl of maybe 10 stands up and starts telling a story. No props. No scrolls. Just her voice. It's a myth about how maize was born when a brave hummingbird fought a mountain. Half the story doesn't make literal sense, but you're hooked anyway. By the end, everyone claps. She bows, cheeks pink from praise. The music picks up. Someone grabs your hand. Before you can say no, not that you were going to, you're pulled into the dance. You circle the fire, your feet finding the rhythm more from osmosis than skill. Quatley dances too, face serious, but with eyes that laugh. You don't know the steps. You don't know the rules. And it's fine. The Chinampa sways beneath you, and so do you. Later, sitting again with your tamal, you watch a group of teenagers lighting tiny floating lanterns and sending them across the water. Wishes, they explain. Wishes made of paper and fire. One boy sends his off and says, "May the maize grow sweeter next season." Another whispers, "Let the lake stay full." A girl adds, "Let the frogs sing loud." You craft a lantern yourself. Scribble something silly and honest on the side. Maybe something about finally understanding the sacred art of mud scooping. Or just a quiet thanks for warm food and starry nights. You set it loose. It floats. Farther and farther away, a firefly with ambition. You lie back on the grass now, your body heavy and full, your mind soft around the edges. The music continues. Some dancers are still going. Others have collapsed in giggles. An old man snores in a hammock strung between two willow trees. A nearby dog, nameless but clearly in charge, patrols the snacks. This is not a reenactment. Not a history lesson. It's just life, mud-flecked and joy-smeared, anchored in tradition and buoyed by song. You look up. The moon's higher now, serene and watchful. And beneath it, a floating garden hums with music, laughter, and the promise of more tomorrows. The Chinampas slowly empties, like a tide of joy pulling back toward home. The music fades to a hum, the lanterns flicker out one by one, and even the most stubborn dancers finally surrender to yawns. You stretch, spine popping softly, and glance toward the canoe. Quatley is already there, patiently waiting like some eternal boat spirit who doesn't believe in clocks. You shuffle over, shoes squishing in the moist earth. Before stepping in, you look back one last time. The Chinampa glows with dying firelight and trailing laughter, a memory already forming even as it's still happening. It's hard to leave, but Quatley gives you a nod, and that somehow makes it okay. The paddle cuts the lake's surface like a whisper, the night smooth and soft around you. The air is cooler now, kissed with mist. Somewhere in the reeds, a heron croaks, less majestic call of the wild, more annoyed uncle who stubbed a toe. You grin to yourself. You're drifting now toward one last destination, a quieter one. No drums. No frog choirs. Just silence, stars, and the most ancient Chinampa of them all. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Some of the oldest Chinampas in the Xochimilco area date back to the early 1300s, even before the Mexica, later known as the Aztecs, founded Tenochtitlán. These early constructions were the work of various Nahua peoples who learned to tame the marshes long before empires rose and fell. Their mud scooping, reed weaving, seed sowing hands laid the groundwork for what would become one of Mesoamerica's most remarkable agricultural legacies. And tonight you're visiting one of these ancient survivors. Quatley calls it La Primera, the first. Whether it's actually the first, or just one of the oldest left, no one knows. Historians still argue whether Chinampas were passed down strictly through family lineages or communally rebuilt by neighboring groups after floods and storms. Some suggest the floating gardens were considered semi-sacred spaces themselves, less about ownership and more about stewardship. Kind of like cosmic garden sitting. You approach the Chinampa and immediately feel something different. It's darker here, not unwelcoming, but heavier somehow, like the air holds more memories than oxygen. There are no houses. No torches. Just tall grasses, low trees, and winding vines that twist like old thoughts. You step onto the soft soil and immediately sink a little, your feet hugged by centuries of wet earth. No one speaks. Not even Quatley. Instead, you walk slowly. Each step releases scents, damp cedar, crushed mint, a little sulfur. It smells like time. At the center of the Chinampa, there's a simple altar. Just stones arranged in a spiral, covered in lichen. A few old offerings remain. Dried marigold petals, a cracked gourd, something that looks suspiciously like a tooth. Hopefully from an animal. Probably from an animal. You decide not to ask. You sit by the altar, not because someone tells you to, but because your body says this is the part where we sit down now. Your quirky tidbit: archaeologists in the Xochimilco region have discovered clay figurines buried beneath some Chinampas, often depicting water deities, frogs, and even small boats. These weren't just discarded toys. They were likely offerings to bless the garden's fertility, or thank the lake spirits. Little action figures of reverence, tucked away in the roots like secrets. You half expect the earth to start humming. Instead, Quatley finally breaks the silence. This is where my grandmother used to bring me. We didn't talk. We just listened. You do the same. You hear the ripple of water, the rustle of night reeds, the creak of distant canoes, and underneath it all, something slower, something deeper. The breath of the lake itself, exhaling softly through the soil, as if the Chinampa were dreaming. You close your eyes, and you imagine what this place looked like 500 years ago. A small group of Nawa farmers bend over the mud, scooping it by hand, laughing as they drop worms into each other's baskets. A child plants her first chili sprout. Her father shows her how to balance a reed frame on the poles. A priest, long before Tenochtitlán's grandeur, kneels to ask the clouds for mercy. You feel their presence here, not as ghosts, but as echoes. Quatley hands you a seed. It's dark, glossy, maybe a pumpkin seed. He doesn't explain. You press it into the mud. It's a silly gesture. Symbolic. But also, it feels right. Now you're part of it, he says quietly. There's a stillness now that you didn't notice before. Not the absence of sound, but a complete presence of calm. Your breath syncs with the rhythm of the lake. Even your thoughts seem to slow, soften, melt into the black silk of night. This Chinampa isn't for farming. It's not for parties or frog karaoke. It's for remembering. And remembering doesn't always mean facts or timelines. Sometimes it just means sitting on a 1,000-year-old plot of floating dirt and realizing how much mud can carry. You lie back again, resting your head on Quatley's bundled cloak. The stars shift above you. A shooting star flares across the sky, arrogant and brief. Your arms feel heavy. Your eyelids more so. And yet, even now, the Chinampa holds you. Not like a bed. More like a story that doesn't end. Not really. Just pauses. Like this. The canoe rocks gently as Quatley paddles back through the hushed canals, your body draped across its bench like a half-dreaming cat. You're not entirely awake, but not quite asleep either, that magical in-between space where time doesn't matter and even your thoughts wear pajamas. The sky has deepened into a bottomless indigo. No more lanterns, no more music. Just the soft plunk of the paddle and the occasional watery whisper of a fish turning lazily beneath the surface. You pass Chinampas that now look like silhouettes of forgotten dreams, some dotted with sleeping huts, others nothing but tangled vines curling into moonlight. This is a city of shadows now, silent and waiting for dawn. But Quatley isn't quite done with you. You want to see something strange? He asks. You raise an eyebrow, but say nothing. Honestly, it feels like a rhetorical question at this point. He steers you into a narrow channel, nearly choked with lilies. The canoe crunches forward slowly, parting them like hair. On either side, the reed walls loom close, making this feel less like a journey and more like crawling inside the lake's private thoughts. And then, you arrive. It's a Chinampa, but not like the others. This one is abandoned. Wild. Half sunken on one end, like a book falling off a shelf. The trees have overtaken it, roots bulging through the walkways, vines strangling the wooden poles, soil spilling out at the corners like forgotten stories. The scent is sharp, moss, decay, pond water, and something faintly metallic. Welcome to the Ghost Garden, Quatley says with a smirk. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Not all Chinampas were eternal. Over the centuries, especially after Spanish colonization, many were neglected, destroyed, or repurposed for other kinds of land development. Some were absorbed into urban sprawl. Others, like this one, were simply left to dissolve back into the lake, silent casualties of changing times. Quatley lets you disembark, and you step carefully onto the spongy surface. The soil squishes unpleasantly. Your foot sinks a little more than expected, and you do that awkward, "Oh no, I'm about to be one with the swamp" dance. Quatley doesn't help. He just watches, amused. But once your footing stabilizes, You look around and realize, it's kind of beautiful. Broken, yes. But beautiful. There's a tree growing sideways off the edge, its roots exposed like tangled nerves. A moss-covered canoe lies split in two, its frame chewed by time. Birds have nested in what used to be a wooden frame for drying squash. Nature, it seems, is less concerned with permits and very big on squatters' rights. You find an old tool half buried in the mud. A wooden scoop, maybe. Split down the middle, but still recognizable. It rests in your hand like an artifact from another life. Your quirky tidbit: some Aztec tools for Chinampa maintenance were made not of metal, but obsidian-edged wood. This gave them a precision edge, but also made them more fragile. You imagine a scoop like this breaking mid-mud, and some poor farmer muttering ancient Nahuatl curse words while trying to patch it with twine in pure optimism. People say this place is cursed, Quatley says casually. You raise both eyebrows. He shrugs. Not cursed like angry ghosts. Just too quiet. Like the garden remembers everything. And not all memories are kind. Historians still argue whether some Chinampas were considered sacred burial zones in times of war or famine. A few have revealed bone fragments beneath their soil, but no definitive answers. Some claim it was just coincidence, human remains washed in by floods. Others think certain gardens became memorial spaces, where families laid to rest not just people, but pain. You breathe in. The air tastes different here. More ancient. It hits you then, with surprising softness. The floating gardens are not just marvels of engineering. They're not just vegetables on platforms or clever mud-scooping hacks. They're living memories, ephemeral, flexible, prone to rot and rebirth. And just like people, they age. They outlive some things. They forget others. Some get honored. Others, like this one, vanish quietly, wrapped in lilies and whispered stories. Quatley kneels near the edge of the garden and tosses a pinch of dried herbs into the water. You ask him what it's for. He says, to say sorry. For not visiting sooner. You nod, not sure what to say. The wind rustles the reeds gently, like it understands. Then, as if sensing you've absorbed enough melancholy, Quatley stands. Let's go home, he says. Back in the canoe, the lake feels wider than before. You're heading toward the dock, toward sleep, toward the part of your own life that isn't made of mud and maze. The outline of the city glows faintly in the distance, a modern skyline trying to forget the lake beneath it. You think about everything you've seen, the elegant geometry of the Chinampas, the laughter of farmers, the aching slowness of sacred nights, the green fire shimmer of frog-filled twilight, and the way seeds seem to carry secrets. And yes, even the art of scooping mud with absurd devotion. This isn't a story about empires or battles. It's about soft things: soil, water, silence. About how life floats when it needs to. And how sometimes survival doesn't roar, it whispers. The canoe drifts into its final glide, your body weightless with sleep. The moon above is a slow smile, and the stars are dimming now, as if politely bowing out. Quatley ties the boat to the dock with the kind of quiet that only comes from 1,000 repetitions. You don't move. Not yet. The world is too soft to disturb. Your breathing slows. The lake does too. Everything folds in. Somewhere far off, a night bird calls once and then goes silent again. A breeze brushes your cheeks like a lullaby with no lyrics. The Chinampas are behind you now, but they linger in your thoughts, woven plots of water and earth, stitched by human hands, whispered into being by generations who asked only for enough rain, enough sun, enough time. You remember the feel of the mud between your fingers. The way the tamal tasted under a sky filled with dancing. The tiny weight of a seed dropped into ancient soil. And now, even your thoughts begin to float. You are a canoe drifting. You are a seed dreaming of light. You are the hush before dawn. So take one more breath. Let it out slowly. There's nothing left to do. Nothing left to fix. Just sleep. Sleep, and let the gardens grow without you tonight.